to share a couple of things about the house, and then we're going to let him talk. In 1898, Andrew Hargis built the house, and he and a lot of people had the idea that the capital of Nebraska, plus maybe the capital of the whole United States, might move to Grand Island, Nebraska. And he thought there should be a really magnificent home so people could come and see it. So that's kind of what happened. And if you want to hear more about any of this, go on the tour. They have lots of details, and I'm not going to bore you. But I wanted to let you know who all was here. 1913, so about, 15 years later, the Coates family moved in, and he was also a businessman. Andrew Hargis had started the business college in town, which was kind of cool, and did some other things. This gentleman came here as the manager of, some of you will recognize this, the Keeler Hotel. That's what brought him to Grand Island, Nebraska. He ended up having a fruit company and a bank, and they both burned down, and it was just, lots of things happened. Again, you'll hear that on the tour. 1935, we have the Johnston Sanitarium, who took over the house, and that was an organization, it was chiropractic and health clinic. Then 1945, we had the Christ Lutheran Church. We've had a lot of people in this house, a lot of different things. And they did a lot of different things to the house as well. They were here, it looks like, about 8 years. And then the Grand Island Women's Club, which I'm guessing is what all of you kind of remember, is the white women's club here. And they were doing really good. And then in 2020, this group of women purchased it so we could restore it and use it for purposes. We figure it's a very historic place and something we need to take care of. So that's a little bit of that. Now let me tell you about who's going to do most of the speaking today. I was asked to introduce him, and so I thought about this, and I said, well, I could tell you that he's worked in the funeral home industry for 40 years, or I could tell you that he started his own business 25 years ago, All Faiths Funeral Home. I could also tell you about all the nonprofits and the schools and the different organizations who have benefited from his generosity and kindness. I could tell you about how he's blessed with his wife, who is here. Karina? She's in the back. Anyway, and some of his staff is here too, which is kind of cool. And Caitlin and Dylan and his grandchildren. I could tell you all about what a great family man is. I could tell you about all the accolades and different things that he's been awarded because of all the work he's done for our community. He was Man of the Year. He ran for Mr. Habitat for Humanity. Did some really different kinds of things, I think, in that endeavor. But here's what I want to tell you about who he is. Picture a single mom, 3 little kids, has a job, barely making it. Dad dies. Only child, actually only stepchild, only child. And Dad has no money, doesn't know what to do. Dad is a veteran. And because we hadn't been in Nebraska long enough, he didn't qualify for benefits for a funeral or anything that way. Because he was no longer in Wyoming, he didn't qualify for their veteran benefits. And so this person knew him and went over and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't handle this. I don't know. And he said, you know what? We'll figure this out. And he did. And then even, there is a cost to have a funeral. And he said, you pay whatever you can, whenever you can. And I'll tell you what. That's what kind of man he is. And he does stuff like that all the time that you don't know about, I don't know about. He is an incredible person. And I'm so glad. He's saying, would you shut up? I could just hear And so I just want to you guys know him. I know, he knows everybody, right? So please help me welcome him. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anita. I am embarrassed. I want to thank all of you for being here. This is pretty incredible. I've had a couple of you say that, man, you know how to pack in the crowd here. And I'm thinking, I got to start being nice to people now so somebody will show up at my funeral. But again, I want to thank you and to my lovely bride of almost 42 years for being here as well. I have a problem of kind of digging the hole sometimes and, get myself in trouble, as they say. But I tell my friends that I have a license to carry a shovel. But I've shared with many people that, and with my beautiful wife, that she truly was the answer to my prayers. Back in high school, we met when I was 12 and she was 13. Her family from Lincoln was camping next to my family in North Platte. And, you know, God redeemed me from a really difficult life that could have been had He not brought the two of us together. So again, I say that she was the answer to my prayers, but to all the men here, be careful what you pray for. Again, I want to thank all of you for being here. This is an amazing house. And folks, I got to remind you that a historical place like this, a beautiful historical house, just doesn't happen by itself. It happens because of wonderful people that care about their community, that have fundraisers. When I was here a couple days ago to get a lay of the land, here are all these volunteers bringing their mops and their brooms and their dust rags and so forth to clean the house. Again, to all of the committee of the Harges House here in the Grand Island Women's Club, I want to thank you for doing what you do for not only this house, but for Grand Island. So let's give a shout out. Following my presentation, again, they will give tours and so forth. And then on this buffet over here in the back tables, and there's a table over here, there's a lot of historical artifacts that we were able to bring for today. Some of them are going to be worked in or incorporated into what I have to say, including this beautiful oval picture of an angel holding a little baby. I need to give recognition to a dear friend of my wife and myself. Her name is Kathy McCauley, and she has been a funeral historian for many years, so it's kind of ironic that we became friends. But so many of these artifacts belong to her. She's not able to be here because she's has an illness in her family. Also, I want to give recognition to Scott Saline as well. Folks, this morning we had a beautiful horse-drawn hearse that was displayed in the yard here. And what my last hour and a half has been like is I saw my weather radar about 2:30, and I saw red coming towards Grand Island. So I came and picked up the horse-drawn hearse, took it back to his barn, of which I'm very sorry that all of you don't have an opportunity to see that. But to his wife, Mary Saline, is here, but to Scott, we want to thank him for allowing us to do that. About a week and a half ago, I shared a service for a beautiful lady that was 101 years old. And as I was reading a book that was prepared by her family when she turned 100, this paragraph really just caught my eye. They say that life is a bed of roses, but even roses have thorns. And we've not been without thorns in our life, but thankfully for most of us, our lives have had more roses. I am grateful again for being with you to share some history about funerals, or as I perceive it, celebrations of life. My personal history of funerals dates back to when I was 11 years old, back in 1974, attending my oldest brother's funeral, listening to the 21-gun salute, taps echoing from the distance as he had just passed as he returned from Vietnam. Later that same year, in 1974, again I was 11 years old, my mom had me ride in the back of a black military car with a priest and an Army officer. On the way to my parents' friends who lived out in the country, I was there to give them directions to the farmhouse. They were there to notify the family that their son was killed in a helicopter crash. Again, I was 11. Looking back, I don't believe that I chose the career of being a funeral director as I think the career chose me. As God has already written our story, today I'd like to just share a few chapters. This year, as Nita had mentioned, it marks my 40th anniversary as a licensed funeral director. Wow, I'm old. That's what some of my staff members say. My career has included burying the last of the World War I veterans I remember well, and now soon to be the last of the World War II veterans. The span of my career has witnessed the use of pagers. Remember those? Having to carry, at first it was just 2 dimes, then a quarter, just for when my pager went off so I could call the answering service as soon as I found a payphone. And now, with our cell phones, where we can call whenever and wherever. I reflect about the days of calling the Grand Island Independent, reading to them an obituary, while the person on the other end with the headset was typing as I read the obituary. And then I'd have to hand deliver the photo to the Grand Island Independent to be scanned. The day of professional printers printing our little memorial folders, we called them, to now doing our own printing of the beautiful bulletins that are customized and personalized. I went from just being a funeral director, always thinking I was going to work for someone else, to now the blessing, again, as Anita mentioned, been blessed with the All Faiths Funeral Home, celebrating 25 years this past March. At the time, never did I think that I would be given a platform to be able to celebrate life in such a way, and to be able to remind people of God's love. At a conference I was at a few years ago, a speaker had shared that the majority of the people in the United States do not want any mention of God in their funerals. I listened, and I listened. And then later in his presentation, I shared that I had to respectfully disagree with that comment. And I told him to share that statement to a group of funeral directors is truly a cop-out. Because for so many, we may be their last resort. I also reminded him that there's a hunger and a thirst for God's love. And yes, many do not have a church home, but they still thirst. And I truly believe that we can fill their cup with hope. When you die, it doesn't mean that you have lost. It means that you have won by how you have lived and how you have loved in your life. And for those of us of faith, it means that you have won through the victory of the cross. Death is not a bad thing, folks. For as long as there have been humans, there have been funerals. Every society, religion, and culture have its own funeral rites. During my 40 years as a funeral director, I have witnessed funerals become more personalized and individualized. I'd like to share an old story with you. On the outskirts of a small town, there was a big, old pecan tree just sitting inside the cemetery fence. One day, 2 boys filled up a bucket full of nuts and sat down by the tree out of sight and began dividing the nuts. One for you, one for me, one for you, one for me, said one boy. Several dropped and rolled down towards the fence. Another boy came riding along the road on his bicycle, and as he passed, he thought he heard voices from inside the cemetery, and he slowed down to investigate. Sure enough, he heard one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. He just knew what it was, and he jumped back on his bike and rode off. And just around the bend, he met an old man with a cane hobbling along. "Come here quickly," said the boy. "You won't believe what I've heard. Satan and the Lord are down at the cemetery dividing up souls." That's not the punchline, folks. The man said, "Beat it, kid. Can't you see it's hard for me to walk?" And when the boy insisted, the man hobbled slowly to the cemetery. Standing by the fence, they heard, "One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me." And the old man whispered, "Boy, you've been telling the truth. Let's see if we can see the Lord." And shaking with fear, they peered through the fence, yet were unable to see anything. The old man and the boy gripped the wrought iron bars of the fence tighter and tighter as they tried to get a glimpse of the Lord. At last they heard, "One for you, one for me. That's all. Now let's go get those nuts by the fence and we'll be done." Now, you all know the difference between a comedian and a funeral director. So a comedian will make you laugh, and a funeral director will make you cry. So here we go. The history of funerals in America. I will begin, first of all, with the Native American funerals. Before it was the United States, the land we occupy today, as we all know, belonged to thousands of indigenous tribes. I have to share a little story about what happened in our household last summer. My beautiful wife, her uncle, is a genealogist, has all the family. And he had called her and was so excited because on the East Coast, he found where their great-great-great-grandfather had settled and where the farmstead was. And I shared with them, me being 34% Native American, I said, "Uncle Larry, I don't mean to burst your bubble, but that land belonged to my great-great-grandfather." For the Native people, each tribe had its own identity, its own way of life, and its own philosophy about death. One of the largest tribes was the Sioux. Family and friends took part in a 4-day viewing, which was thought to help the deceased person's spirit travel to its final resting place. The tribe would place the body on a burial scaffold for 1 year prior to the burial. We have a picture back there as well with a beautiful eagle feather that was given to me by a Native American. Excuse me, it's right here. Thank you. I'm glad you're sitting up front. They would wrap the body in blankets and cloth and surround it with personal belongings. Again, recently the eagle feather was given to me at a funeral where part of the family I had helped with, they were part Native American, and they shared with me that the Native American belief was much like chopping down a tree. The tree does not die. It is used to make furniture, maybe this beautiful house, the desk, the table, the stand here. But the spirit continues. The tree lives on. And so that's the faith of the Native Americans, knowing that the spirit will continue on. In the 1800s, families cared for their own dead. There typically wasn't a professional mortician around to clean and dress the deceased. Instead, families took on the task themselves and took care of the dead at home. They would wash the body, dress the body, and place it in a coffin, which the family made or purchased from a general store or a local carpenter. Funerals happened at home. Some families had specific rooms for funerals, usually the parlor. If a family had to use the space of a local undertaker, generally it meant that they were poor and their home was too small to have a parlor. So they used the local undertaker's place. For this home here, this beautiful Harges home, as we think about Andrew M. Harges building this house in 1898, and again, he was co-founder of the Grand Island Business and Normal College. This would have been considered a home with a family of means. To have such a beautiful home, but to have room in here for a family viewing or funeral, to have a parlor. This home actually, I found out, in 1917, did have a funeral here. Now, getting back again to the 1800s, the funeral service would take place generally at a local or nearby church with the cemetery or the cemetery yard right next to the church. What were the first funeral homes like? As the population of the U.S. grew and became centered around major cities and towns, there became a need for professional funeral services and a location dedicated to mourning the loss of a loved one. Viewing services, highly specialized services like embalming, which became popular following the Civil War. So a professional funeral director, known back then as an undertaker, was needed to perform those tasks. The first undertakers in America were cabinet makers and carpenters who had experience building caskets or coffins. The first funeral parlors had living quarters for the undertaker and dedicated space for public viewing. Once again, they lived in that house where funerals were held. Almost 42 years ago, in addition to the vows that I made to my wife, I also had to promise that I'd never make her live in a funeral home. Since their origins, American funerals have also changed in multiple ways. When undertakers started helping families with their dead, they considered themselves tradesmen, not professionals, but tradesmen. Professional undertakers became known as morticians, and now, as we're referred to as funeral directors. Embalming, again, became popular during the Civil War, when soldiers' bodies needed to be preserved for their long journey home. Early in American history, burial was the norm. The first crematorium opened in the late 1800s in Pennsylvania, but it was met with intense hostility. Again, I've been a funeral director for 40 years now. When I first became licensed, the state of Nebraska for cremation, the percentage was 7%. And now, in some communities, it's 65 to 70% cremation. So again, things change. Early American funerals followed the tradition set by the local Catholic and Protestant churches. Today, traditional American funerals follow the same rites laid out by those religions. But a funeral can also be highly personal and individual. Many families choose to celebrate a person's life rather than exclusively mourning their death. I always shared with my amazing staff that if we do our profession correctly and serve each and every family the way that we're supposed to serve them, these families will become your friends for a lifetime.
Look around.
And for many of you, yes, it is so true. Again, it's about being able to leave a lasting imprint on the hearts of those families, knowing that you have done everything that you could to help celebrate life. Yes, the mourning is part of it. You have to mourn. But I often remind people that grieving is also loving. We give thanks for the love. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the immigrant cultures. The United States has many ethnicities and many cultures. And as we know, Grand Island has a strong hold on this diversity. Once again, many of their traditions are predicated by their faith. And I'm going to give you some examples of different cultures, of families that we serve. For instance, many of the Mexican Americans, they often choose to have their loved ones sent back to Mexico because they strongly still feel that Mexico was their home. For many families from Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, they choose to have the burial of their loved ones at a local cemetery because this is now their home. Again, it's their culture. Another country of which we have many immigrants that are part of our melting pot here is from the country of Cuba. Now, because the two countries of Cuba and the United States do not have friendly borders, it is nearly impossible for us to be able to send a loved one when they die back to the country of Cuba. We tried one time. The family was insistent, saying that it was possible. We had their loved one with us in our care for about 3 months. And the family in the heartache every day wondering about the paperwork that we kept sending back and forth to Washington, D.C. And so again, with the country of Cuba, we will not attempt that again. The Catholic Church is very strong with many ethnic families here, but however, many Latin American ethnicities have strong ties to other Christian churches, such as the Assembly of God. Grand Island is host to many of these churches. Many of these churches on 3rd Street, on 4th Street, sometimes in between. And I got to tell you, folks, these people are beautiful people. They are loving people. And at times, the funerals, they're hurting. It is pretty amazing for myself and our staff to be able to work with some of these families because we get to learn their love and their culture and so forth. And often with those small churches in the storefront buildings, they have taken over. They have turned into beautiful churches and reminders of God's love. It's a good thing that those empty buildings are being used. But as well, often what happens is they'll have all-night vigils with the body in the casket. So we'll deliver the casket to the church, and they'll have their all-night vigil. And then the next morning, we show up at a certain time, and they help us place the casket into our coach. They follow us in procession to the cemetery. But again, folks, we are a melting pot, and we always have been. As we remember the different cultures, one thing that is common is that we all grieve, and we all mourn. We all give thanks for the blessing. As well, Grand Island has many immigrants who are of the Muslim faith as well. Muslim burial practices emphasize dignity, simplicity, and respect of the deceased. Key rituals include prompt burial, washing and shrouding the body, and offering funeral prayers. The body should not be embalmed, nor should any organs be removed for medical reasons. Islamic custom and law forbids cremation. Instead, Muslim bodies should be buried in a cemetery in ground. Again, cremation is not seen as respectful to the deceased, and it is believed that it prevents the body from being properly prepared for the afterlife. Here in Grand Island, when an Islamic person passes away of the Muslim faith again, what happens is the body is sent to the funeral home in Lexington. And the reason for that is the Muslim community bought a special piece of ground at the Lexington Cemetery. That is strictly a Muslim section. And so, again, we arranged to have the body taken to the funeral home in Lexington, and generally they try to have the burial within 24 hours. As compared to the Grand Island City Cemetery, the Grand Island Cemetery, since its inception, has not segregated culture or religion. There's not a Catholic section, there's not a Protestant section, there's not a Muslim section. Hence the reason they found the place in Lexington. So just a little information about the Muslim faith. The next thing I'd like to share with you is some information about headstones or grave markers. On the display back there, there's quite a few, mainly on this buffet, there's quite a few what are called coffin plates. And these were actually plates that were found in antique shops. So we didn't go to a grave and pull them off or anything like that. They were found in antique shops. But the coffin plate back in the day, may have said beloved, may have said father or mother, may have had the individual's name on it as well. But it was a plate that was affixed to the coffin and then taken home by the family. And then all of a sudden, there's no family anymore. And that's how they end up in an antique store. Comparing that, I do want to mention, for our veterans, we choose to give each and every one of our veteran families a beautiful wooden case for the American flag. But in that case, I always put a copy of the Veterans Memorial Bulletin in there. For years from now, when there's no family and somebody finds that, they can open it up and know which veteran that belonged to. Getting back to headstones, though. Headstones serve as enduring memorials, marking the final resting places of loved ones in both burial and cremation practices. Over time, the use of headstones has evolved with cultural and religious beliefs shaping their significance. The term headstone refers to marking of the grave on the head end of the grave. So when we carry a casket to the grave, the foot end of the casket is always buried towards the east. And the head is to the west. That means the headstone is to the west, hence the name headstone. And the reason for that, the feet to the east, is biblically speaking, upon Resurrection Day. Okay. Symbols on the headstones vary across cultures, representing meaningful connections to religion, culture, and heritage. An anchor, there's a beautiful breastplate over there that came from the 1700s that was came from an antique store, but it dated back to a cemetery in Boston. But anyway, the anchor is a symbol of steadfastness. Angels depicted in various poses may symbolize the soul's flight to heaven, or an angel blowing a trumpet can represent the day of judgment. A lion is often found on Jewish headstones, symbolizing bravery in protecting the grave from unwanted spirits. I'd like to share with you a little bit about the feature of the headstone that stands straight up, like the Washington Monument. It is actually an obelisk monument. And the meaning behind that is a finger pointed to heaven, of which there's a plaque on that table over there. No, excuse me, it's over there. Of the finger pointed to heaven. There's a couple of you that said, Dan, I'm going to have to leave because I have to go to a funeral. One lady told me that I have a nail appointment at 5 o'clock. Kelly Sheridan. So they say that when speaking to an audience, the time to quit speaking is when the listening is listening. So I'm going to try to stick to that rule. I would like to close with these final thoughts, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. As the world constantly is in motion, changes beyond our control will take place. But remember, grieving a loss is something none of us are able to escape from. And as I mentioned before, grieving is loving, and we give thanks for that love. How we memorialize or celebrate life varies from person to person, culture to culture, and religion to religion. But always remember, folks, life is a bed of roses. But even roses have thorns. Give thanks for the blessings that we mostly have roses rather than thorns. I want to thank you for showing up today. Again, but it's even a greater privilege to be considered friends of yours for all these years, so I appreciate that. But are there any questions or things that I forgot to talk about? Mary? Okay. Sure. Man, I feel like I'm Donahue here. Go ahead.
When my sister was here from Chicago and our mother passed away, I said, well, what funeral home would you like to call? And here's a list of them in town. And when she came to All Faith, she said, oh, I love that name. And so that's the one we chose. And she had no other idea. You know, I knew you, and I knew, but I didn't steer her one way or the other. She loved the name. So how did you come up with the name?
Nobody could pronounce Naranjo funeral. I'm really kind of serious about that. So many funeral homes are called by the family name, but no one could pronounce my name. And, but then my wife and I got to thinking, and we had such a close relationship with our veterans, and especially what used to be the Grand Island Veterans Home. And they had a beautiful chapel in there that was called All Faiths Chapel. And so, as you go throughout the United States, there are many All Faiths funeral homes. I just own the rights to Nebraska. I had my insurance agent call me one time and said, Dan, I didn't know your hearse was in an accident in New Orleans. I said, it wasn't. It was another All Faiths funeral. But thank you for that, though. And it's the whole step of this past 25 years has been a God thing. And he keeps, through this Holy Spirit, keeps taking care of us. And that was one to begin with, was the name. So thank you. Yes, Mary?
I have a question. Years ago, when I grew up and young, I just remember people dying in our family or afterwards. They never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. Why couldn't they talk about? I just want to know.
Yeah, Mary, to repeat her thought or question, years ago in family, when somebody died, that was kind of it. Especially for children. We were referred to what was called the forgotten mourners. And, you didn't bring up the loved ones because you're supposed to move on.
Right.
But, and I can attest to that firsthand. When I was 11, when my brother died, I got shipped off to babysitters. And I didn't realize that I was struggling until later on in life when I met my beautiful wife and I was able to finally start to talk about what happened. But that's a great question. It's important now. So often when I officiate funerals, I'll remind the friends, thank you for being here today But don't only pray for this family today, but keep them in your prayers in the days to come. And continue to share your story of their loved one with them. Because there's nothing greater than for a family member, for someone to come up and say, hey, I got a story about your dad. What a huge blessing and comfort that is. But thank you for bringing that up.
But I also wanted to
Could
say.
you talk into the microphone?
Oh, but I also wanted to say, my voice carries, but when my son died, I lost my son when he was 33, 17 years ago, to leukemia. And when he died, before he died, my mom was still living. My dad had passed the year before. And I had a discussion with my mom, and it was more like my dad didn't want to talk about it. And then my mom would be quiet about talking about anybody that died. And I said, Mom, I have to talk about my son, because I want no one to forget it.
Yeah, and that, I think that was part of the generation, Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
No.
didn't talk about those things.
No.
But it's different now.
It's different now, and we all kind
But I
of
want you
doing
to
our
know,
own things.
I've been very blessed to get to know your family, and I know you're tired of seeing me. Your
We
family's
just
been
love
pretty
Dan.
special to me.
Dan has compassion in his little fingernail than most people have all their
I
life.
don't know, I've been showing them here lately. Next question.
I have a question.
Here, hold on, we're gonna get it over. Over here somewhere. Okay.
Okay.
Well, Dan, when you were talking about the headstones, and in my husband's grandfather's plot where his ashes will be buried, there are 3 footstones.
Sure.
That we didn't know what they were, and now we've learned about that. And I also wanted to ask you, have you had any of the Buddhist funerals? What do they do, the Buddhist community here in Grand Island?
With the question, couple comments. First of all, reminder that there's not only headstones, but there's what's called footstones as well. Generally, the footstone is when there's a big family monument that might say Jones on it, but then the footstones are the marking of the individuals who are buried in that family plot. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And then the other thing was about the Buddhist community, many of them Laotians. Typically, with the culture of the Buddhist community, cremation is not only preferred and accepted, but it's their way of doing things. But typically, the body is present. Members of the church, or excuse me, not the church, but the Buddhist community will come and they'll shroud the body, or they'll clean and shroud the body, placed in a casket. There will be the funeral, and then they follow us to the crematory. And then they help push the button on the crematory. But along with that, if this was the chapel, all the women would be dressed in white on this side, and all the men dressed in white on that side. The very first one I did was, I was working with the daughter, and I'm always trying to make sure everything's going properly. And she says, before the service, Dan, you can ask me now, but when the service starts, you can't talk to me. I said, okay. Because again, there was the women on one side, the men on the other side. As we have a procession to the crematory, as they're carrying the coffin or the body out of the hearse to the crematory to be inserted, they have wrapped coins, nickels, quarters, dimes, wrapped in foil. And this is to help on the journey to their afterlife. And I didn't know that until I got hit by coins as I'm helping carry it. But I got to tell you, it is truly a privilege of ours to be able to figure out different cultures. And, we do have legalities here in the United States You know, you're not going to be able to bury your loved one's body in your backyard if it's not already a licensed cemetery with the state of Nebraska. In other countries, you can do that. And the people, when they come here, they think that, okay, maybe we can do that. And then we have to inform them. But we try to meet their culture the best that we can. But yet, sometimes
It's going
having
to
to
be
inform
cremated.
them.
I don't know for sure what her funeral plans are. I guess I'm speaking about my mother, but I don't know what her funeral plans are actually, but I know she prepaid for something anyway. It happens to be the one that closed down here on Webb Road.
Sure.
Are they out at Grand Island Cemetery now?
No, they're at West Lawn Cemetery in an office. It's not a funeral home, it's just an office.
Office, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a funeral home license, but there's no chapel or anything.
Okay. I think also that I heard she wanted cremation. Now, if the family decided we wanted to have a visitation, does she have to be embalmed first within 3 days, or I don't know how?
Yeah. The question here is mainly about for cremation. If the family wants a viewing, does the body have to be embalmed? No. Okay. For a family viewing. But if you're going to have a public viewing, then other rules and regulations apply to where generally embalming would be necessary. And the two main reasons for embalming, one is to preserve the tissue, and then the other is for disinfection. So the person may not have died of a contagious disease, but they might be a carrier. So the embalming is to disinfect as well as preserve.
So did you have to rent a casket for the visitation?
Typically for us, no. We have a viewing casket that you can just use. It has a new insert each time. Some funeral homes just choose to use what's called a dressing table. Otherwise, we do have a casket. Use the word rent, but I like to call it a celebration of life casket. So. But great question. Next question, yes?
How many cremation places are there in Grand Island and Nebraska?
In Nebraska, there are several crematories. The question was, how many crematories are there? In the state of Nebraska, it just varies. There's many, especially in the Omaha, Lincoln areas. There's one in Hastings. There's one out at West Lawn Cemetery. The one that I have been using ever since we've opened is the Central Nebraska Cremation Service, which is in Gibbon. It is actually operated by a funeral director and her husband. And so that's kind of, yeah. But to give you an exact number of how many in the state of Nebraska, I wouldn't know that. So I'm looking at the wrong person. Who asked that question? Next question. Yes, Carol.
Talk about the trend like 100 years ago of funeral homes being located in large old homes.
Carol had asked me a question, and oftentimes if I don't know the answer, I'm going to make something up. So here it goes. The question was the tradition of funeral homes being in large old homes, similar to this. Yeah, that is very common. Again, I think as time went on from, a small cabinet maker becoming an undertaker to the evolution of, funeral homes opening and so forth, I think often they required big space. So generally it was in a big home. It wasn't like you were going to put up a chief building or anything like that. But I think it was just because of the space and the tradition. I know when Karina and I opened up All Faiths Funeral Home, we were about this close to leaving Grand Island. And something told me to go look at that old Buffy's Buffet restaurant. And I knew another funeral home was going to come in next door. And I'm not a visionary, but when I walked in, God gave me a vision because it was Dr. Budd's medical clinic, and there were exam rooms and labs and a pharmacy. But God gave me a vision of what we could do. And I remember the realtor, I asked him, I said, what does the bank want for this property? And it was like $850,000. And we didn't have a penny to our name. And I said, I can't afford that. And then he says to me on the way out, as a joke, Dan, make him an offer. Honest to God. And he called me the next day and he said, the bank accepted your offer. There was just all kinds of miracles. So that kind of segued into maybe a long answer for you, Carol. Okay. Other questions?
Over here, and she's
Okay.
been getting this.
Yes.
I guess, can you explain this? In the 1800s, people that would have a casket in their parlor, and when they would carry the casket out, they would have to carry it out head first or feet first, and then having the mirrors cover black cloth covering the mirrors in the house.
Sure. And Debbie, I believe what you're referring to, a couple of things. First of all, black was considered the color of mourning. And after 6 months, you were okay to wear gray. You were in what's called half mourning. And then the other thing that you had commented on was when we bring a coffin or a casket into a home or into a church, typically we take them in feet first, especially into the church, up to the altar. Unless it's a pastor or a priest. And then we take them in head first. So if you stood the casket up, they would face their flock. And for the other for those of us who aren't very reverent, we go feet first so we can face the cross. So a little bit of trivia. Thank you for bringing that up, Debbie. Other questions? Oh.
What can you share about that tradition of the hair that is woven for
Okay.
pictures?
Great question. So many things to cover, and back on that table over there, there's a couple examples of what's called hair art, and that was the question. Hair art was very traditional, dating back to the Victorian era with Queen Victoria. But when somebody died, often part of the hair or locks of the hair were cut off and twisted into beautiful art forms or flower forms. I have a piece back there that has a whole family tree, and each one has the little twistings of the hair art. But that's something we don't see very often, but if a family wants us to give them a lock of hair, we'll do that. What is very common right now are thumbprints. And so for everyone every family that we serve now for their loved ones, we automatically take their thumbprint and they can order a little necklace with their loved one's thumbprint. So that's kind of a popular thing.
And I'll just tell you, my daughter did that for me, and then she had something my mom always said to me on the back of it. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah.
It's very, very nice.
Yeah. I have my brother's picture on a little thing on my necklace here. And he's been gone for 16 years, and I wear it every day just thinking of him. Yeah. Great questions. Any other questions?
Are there different things that people are buried with that family wants to put in the coffins?
Do you like Bud Light? The question was, is it possible to bury items in the casket or the coffin? And I asked her if she liked Bud Light. So, yes, whatever the family wants to put in there. Oftentimes, I'd love to have children or grandchildren write a note to their grandpa or to their grandma, and they can put it in. The other day, the gentleman service that I had, the gentleman was born in 1943. There's some history between when the penny became copper in 1943 or something like that. So all the grandkids came and put a penny in the casket. I had one family writing check for $1 million because mom always wanted $1 million. And then they told me, Dan, don't steal that check and try to capture it. And then something else that's very common is with our pets. You know, oftentimes when we lose a pet, we have them cremated. And so we do bury pets' ashes in the casket. That's very common. Yes.
We did that when my husband passed away. There was a drawer in the casket that came out that they could put their drawings or colors or poems or whatever instead of, you know, not laying on it, but in a drawer.
Yeah, for a short time there was some caskets that had that little memory drawer, and they're kind of getting away from that. But the casket itself is a drawer. And to kind of close this out, in regards to that, sometimes I'll share with the family this beautiful casket. Remember, it's kind of like an empty tomb. It's really one that your loved one no longer dates. We know where their spirit's at. And so comparing that to Jesus' empty tomb. And so, but again, it's pretty amazing to be able to celebrate life and just to give thanks for love and for God's love. So, any other questions? Got time for a couple more.
When she was talking about putting stuff in caskets, can you put bury money or valuables in there?
Yeah, the question is, can you put valuables in the casket? You know, sometimes families will bring in very valuable jewelry. It's like, we do let them know that we're not responsible because, you know, there's a lot of dysfunction in families anymore. So grandma's 50,000 diamond ring disappears, you better look at your family. We do have security cameras and things like that. But yeah, valuables can be buried or they can be taken off. So either way.
Another question. Years ago, the embalmers were used to have such a horrendous smell. I mean, at least around here.
I'm sorry, I can't hear
The
you.
embalming fluid,
Okay.
has that changed over the years?
You know, embalming fluid has really changed a lot. Years ago, undertakers, when they embalmed bodies like in the Civil War, or if you think about Abraham Lincoln and his cortege on the train going from community to community, yeah, a lot of times they were embalmed with strict arsenic or strict formaldehyde, and those are carcinogenic. And so like our fluids now that we use have just a little bit of formaldehyde, but they have other chemicals, humectants to keep tissue moisture, glutaraldehyde, and some of the other things. I gotta tell you, I have such a wonderful staff that takes care of me now. They don't even let me do that anymore. So. But does that answer your question? So there's not quite the smell of chemicals that there used to be, or there should not be.
You could walk into a funeral home and you knew it.
Yeah, you know what you smell now? Is flowers. And I'm allergic to most flowers. Any other questions?
If not, can I say a
You
couple
guys
things?
have been an amazing audience. Thank you so much for
First of all, thank you for being here tonight. I want you to thank you for supporting us. We appreciate your donations, and that's how we keep this house going, and we're making some changes and renovating it, so thank you. I think all of us have one last question for you. Could you tell us who the real estate person was that said just make an offer so we can all write them a thank you? Anyway, I want to share that because we're so glad that happened because you're just an integral part of this community, so thank you for that. And again, thank you. We're going to have some tours. If anybody wants to take a tour and see the rest of the house, we have a second floor and a third floor, and you can choose to go up to the third or not. Tiny little staircase, but it's still kind of fun to see. Anything else anybody wants to say? I'm looking at my people there. Okay, just thank you so much. We're glad you were here. If you're interested in the tours, just go over to this door, and they'll be taking you upstairs. Thank you.